Before we get into the video, take a look at these t-shirts. For the gentlemen, there's Papa Squatch. For the ladies, there's Mama Squatch. And for the kids, there's Sasquatch in training. For a limited time, these shirts will be available only on mysteriesofcanada.com for $29 Canadian, or about $21 US. To get a closer look at this rare and elusive apparel, and support this channel in the process, please check out the link in the description. In the summer of 1904, a wild man story once again emerged from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. With the exception of an old Indian legend, recounted by British and Spanish sailors who visited Nootka Sound in the 1790s, this report is the oldest British Columbian Sasquatch story to appear in classic Canadian Bigfoot literature, being referenced in Ivan T. Sanderson's 1961 book, Abominable Snowmen, Legend Come to Life, Chad Arment's 2006 book, The Historical Bigfoot, and John Willison Green's seminal works, The Sasquatch File, On the Track of Sasquatch, and Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us. This tale appeared in newspapers throughout British Columbia, Ontario, and the American states of Washington, Oregon, and Nebraska. Several notable articles we will reference include a piece headlined Wild Man of Vancouver, Strange Being Lately Seen by a Lumberman, printed in the August 4th, 1904 issue of the Kingston Whig Standard, and an article published 4 months later in the Nanaimo Daily News. Several pieces placed this story in the timber country inland from the head of Campbell River, which would seem to be what is now Strathcona Provincial Park west of Buttle Lake, the oldest provincial park in British Columbia. This mysterious region, forming the mountainous heart of Vancouver Island, is steeped in dark native legend, and is most famous in some circles today for being the setting of an alarming number of unsolved disappearances. According to various contemporary newspaper articles, Vancouver Island natives shunned the place, regarding it as the territory of what they called the Masache Ikta, or the Bad Thing, and no money or persuasive art, as one article put it, will induce them to go into it with hunter, trapper, timber cruiser, or prospector. Mike King, the lumber baron around whom the story revolves, was a colorful character, whom earlier newspaper articles indicate made a fortune in the Klondike Gold Rush. For many years in the twilight of that great northern stampede, King operated a sawmill at Caribou Crossing, now Carcross, Yukon, a major stop on the main trail to the Klondike goldfields. Several months before the incident we will relate shortly, he had co-purchased a silver mine in Mexico, and several months after, he would buy a huge tract of timberland in that same country. A number of papers which cover the story we will relate presently averred that he was a superior woodsman with decades of experience in the bush, was a strict teetotaler who never drank, and was regarded as honest and reliable by lumbermen throughout the Pacific Northwest. As an article in Oregon's Corvallis Times put it, Mike King is a man whose word on anything in his business, or pertaining to the woods, is law throughout British Columbia. He knows the wilderness of this province better than any living man, and he never drinks or sees things in the forest. On the subject of the wild man, he is ready at any time to make sworn attestation to the exact truth of his report, but he has been reluctant to discuss the matter, in view of the ever-ready joke. It should be mentioned that several articles published 4 months after the story broke allege that the following encounter took place 4 or 5 years earlier, around the turn of the 20th century. The Indians tell of a wild man on Vancouver Island, began the article in the Kingston Whig Standard, and now a Caucasian, Michael King, relates that he has seen what looked like half man and half ape. King told his story at a campfire, to the accompaniments of a chattering mountain brook and the whispering pines towering to a starlit sky. He was on one of his solitary cruises for timber on the island, and had not seen a human face for days. A strange cry of mingled surprise and fear, very human in its quality, brought him to a sudden halt, rifle in hand, and eyes straining everywhere for an explanation. This was quickly forthcoming, in a manner to try even the nerve of so superb a woodsman as this veteran of the forests. Within 100 yards appeared a thing, large, completely covered with hair, with long arms hanging below the knee, penetrating eyes under a mass of unkempt hair. Certainly a man, said King, but yet such a man as no nation, tribe, or country knows. According to the article in the Nanaimo Daily News, King had caught the creature in the act of washing and sorting certain edible grass roots in a small pond. He said the body was covered with long reddish hair, the article explained, and that its arms were peculiarly long. Startled, King leveled his rifle at the strange creature as it darted up a nearby hill. He kept it in his sights as it stopped halfway up the embankment and turned around to scrutinize him. Mastering his shattered nerves, the woodsman began to advance towards the creature, his finger brushing the trigger. In response, the hairy man bolted into the underbrush with the swiftness of a deer and was lost from sight. Although King was denied a second meeting with this mysterious denizen of the forest, the article in the Nanaimo Daily News alleged that he was later disturbed by its chilling howls. He did not see him again, the article claimed, although his extraordinary cries were heard at intervals during the night, and Mr. King, who sat the night out by a big fire, rifle in hand, was thoroughly convinced that the wild man slipped back silently to inspect him at a distant range during his vigil. The article in the Kingston Whig Standard concluded that King's story, of course, has been received with sarcastic comment on the coast, but it is curious to note that Otto Schock has just come in from the northern end of Vancouver Island, bringing a tale of having seen footprints such as are made by no wild animal that ranges the forests of this continent. While apparently made by a human being, they are those neither of SQUATCH nor white men. The piece in the Nanaimo Daily News described the footprints left by King's wild man, claiming that they appeared to be human, but had very long, spreading toes. An additional detail appeared in the article's final sentence, alleging that, during his wilderness trek, Mike King came across a crude structure in the forest, which he suspected may have been built by the specter he encountered. According to the article in the Kingston Whig Standard, King had heard vague stories about the region's wildman from his native friends, who refused to accompany him into that part of the country. They had said, the article declared, that a fearsome thing lorded it over the country, and in their superstitious terror, they said it was a god of the Spaniards, the descendant of a great chief, who had left his ship at Nootka and mated by force with the princess of the tribe. A piece published in the July 6th issue of Everett Washington's Daily Herald elaborated on this legend, interpreting it as a confused cultural recollection, obscured through long oral transmission, of what the paper indelicately called a union between a baboon and a squaw. There is no conclusive and satisfactory explanation of the phenomenon, wrote the Washington paper's Vancouver, BC correspondent. Mr. King has brought the matter up time and again in his talks with the Indians, whose confidence he enjoys. Bit by bit, he has patched together their theory and tribal tradition, by which it appears that they credit the coming of the original wild man to the days of the Spanish occupation of certain of the West Coast ports. At one of these, Nootka, it is alleged, an immense hairy creature, either baboon or ape, escaped from one of the ships, and after terrorizing the original inhabitants, proceeded to make itself at home in the forest. Thence it is alleged to have issued upon one occasion, and seized an Indian girl, with whom it set up housekeeping. The wild man seen by Mr. King is believed by the Indians to have been the offspring. This interpretation of the legend was echoed in the article in the Nanaimo Daily News, which stated that a story which Mr. King wormed out of an old native, with much difficulty, is to the effect that at the coming of the Spaniards to the west coast, an immense monkey, presumably an ape or orangutan, escaped from one of the vessels, and took refuge in the forest wilderness. Several months later, it appeared suddenly at a west coast village, and the Indians running in terror, it caught and carried away with it a girl of 15. The natives allege that 2 wild children resulted, but that one was found dead in a hut beyond the headwaters of Campbell River years ago, leaving the other lonely creature to dominate the woods. It should be mentioned that an obscure article in Omaha, Nebraska's World Herald, written by a correspondent from Victoria, BC, alleged that the lumber baron's tale was not the first of its kind to appear in British Columbian papers. Old prospectors also tell of reported glimpses of the wild man as far back as 1865, the article contended, when a mining man named Brown, now employed in this city, contributed to the Victoria Colonist a 2-column account of his adventures through the desertion of his Muchalat Indians in terror during an ascent of Gold River, they having seen the wild man, and one of their number having his eyes picked out by the nomadic savage. It is a tradition of all West Coast Indians that loss of sight is a penalty enforced against any Indian venturing into the territory of the Masache Ikta. This author was unable to dig up the 1865 Victoria Colonist article alluded to, although it seems likely that the mining man named Brown is an allusion to British explorer Robert Brown, who led the Vancouver Island exploring expedition in 1864, launched chiefly for the purpose of discovering gold. Brown made no mention of an eye-gouging monster on his 1865 report on the expedition, although he did mention his native guides deserting him near the village of Comox when he expressed a desire to ascend the Puntledge River. This waterway, which Brown named after the Pentlatch Indians, a Central Coast Salish nation which he described as the ancient tribe who lived on its banks, has its source at Comox Lake, which lies at the eastern edge of Strathcona Provincial Park. Rather than the predations of wild men, Brown's guides attributed their reticence to venture up that waterway to their fear of the Sayshath and Hoopakasath Nootka of the Alberni Valley, whom Brown called the Sayshats and Opachasids. It should be mentioned that, the following year, a Victoria paper published an article in which an old lumberman recounted a prospecting trip he made up the Gold River in the 1860s, in which he and his companions encountered a very unique tribe of wild Indians. We will explore this strange story more thoroughly in a future piece. 4 months after the tale of Mike King's harrowing encounter first appeared in print, a dramatic sequel was published in newspapers across the province. This remarkable story, also documented in classic Canadian Sasquatch literature, will be the subject of the next segment of this series.